Welcome back to another explainer. Today we're jumping straight into a really fascinating structural analysis that completely reframes Surah 42 of the Quran. Now, instead of viewing it as this traditional collection of rigid religious rules, this close reading shifts the perspective into something much more profound. It asks us to consider, what if it's actually an advanced, unified operating system for human consciousness?
It's a pretty provocative hook, right? The research essentially asks us to consider that institutional religion might have completely misread the original unmediated code of the text. It prompts us to strip away centuries of theological overlay and ask ourselves, what happens if we've been trying to read a decentralized network through a rigid, top-down hierarchical lens?
To answer that, we're going to decode this framework in 5 steps today. We'll start with the traditional illusion, move into the textual matrix, decode some key concepts, look at the anatomy of division, and finish up with what the analysis calls a consciousness upgrade. Let's get right into it.
All right, Section 1, the traditional illusion. We're exploring fragmented rules versus a unified reality.
To really grasp this paradigm shift, we first have to establish the baseline. Traditionally, the source material argues that scholarship sees this text as basically a fragmented list of moral reminders that require clerical interpretation. For instance, Shura is typically treated as a top-down political rule and Sabr as a sort of passive emotional comfort. But the textual reality presented in this research reveals something entirely different. It points to a unified structural argument where Shura operates as a flat, unmediated network and Sabr is actually a highly active state of consciousness.
Moving right along to Section 2, tasrif, or the textual matrix, basically how the text explains itself.
So you might be wondering, how exactly was this hidden structure uncovered? Well, the analyst uses a methodology known as tasrif, and this is absolutely fascinating because it completely bypasses outside historical reports or institutional traditions. Instead, it treats the text as a closed-loop system. It's basically a linguistic method of self-referencing, cross-referencing root words across different verses so the text literally defines its own terms. In this way, the text itself acts as the ultimate clarifying software.
When you apply this method to the opening verses, something really interesting happens. We see that the foundation here is an absolute unity of revelation. It's not introducing some specific, newly localized religion. Rather, it explicitly connects to those who came before, affirming a single, continuous reality that humans are called to align with.
Okay, Section 3, decoding 4 key concepts. It's time to rebuild the lexicon.
Let's kick things off with Shura, which is actually the word that gives the chapter its title. In its purest linguistic root form, SHWR, it literally means to extract something pure. Think of it kind of like pulling honey from a hive. Fundamentally, it points to a state of mutual alignment and the extraction of clarity.
Now, when you map this concept across the text using tasrif, it turns out Shura isn't just some strict obligation to vote. In verse 3:159, it's a process paired with decision-making. And later, in 42:38, it's listed as an organic, natural characteristic of people who are already consciously responding to their Lord. It's a trait of individuals who are totally open to extracting wisdom from one another entirely without arrogance.
And this completely flips the concept on its head. The research shows Shura shifting away from a top-down political committee or clerical council and into a flat, lateral network. It's describing decentralized agents, basically peer-to-peer processing their affairs to extract optimal clarity together.
Next up is Deen, a word almost always translated today simply as religion. But if we strip away that modern translation, the root reveals a singular, non-fragmented, universal system of accountability. It's a unified orientation toward the single source of reality.
If you track how Deen is used across the text, a really clear pattern emerges. It consistently frames it as one continuous operating system. Verse 42:13 even explicitly states this was prescribed to Noah, Abraham, Moses, and Jesus alike. So while the daily rituals might vary by community, the core system is unified across all conscious history. It's presented as a holistic way of life, not a set of competing sectarian identities.
Then we have our third and fourth concepts, Sabr and Tawakkul. Traditionally, these are usually viewed as passive endurance, or simply waiting around for divine intervention. But the textual reality the analysis uncovers is incredibly dynamic. Sabr is shown as the active steadfastness of consciousness under pressure. And Tawakkul, that's the mental clarity achieved after taking action. You do everything you possibly can, and then you release the outcome. They are highly active psychological stances.
That brings us to Section 4, the anatomy of division and the pathology of sectarianism. So, rhetorical question here. If the original blueprint was this perfectly unified, seamless system, why in the world do we have so many competing, fractured religious sects today? Well, the explainer highlights verse 42:14 to show that this division wasn't just some accidental misunderstanding. It explicitly states that people split after knowledge had come to them, all because of a concept called Baghyan. So what does that mean? Baghyan translates to transgression, overreaching, or a deliberate institutional desire for socio-political dominance. This is a massive takeaway from the research. The text fundamentally views sectarianism as a deliberate strategy by human factions to capture authority, to create clerical gatekeepers, and to mediate the text entirely for their own power.
All right, final section, number 5, the consciousness upgrade. Let's look at the action blueprint.
If human institutions caused all this division, how exactly do we bypass them? Well, verses 42:36-38 actually provide a very specific action blueprint to do just that. Step 1, establish inner orientation with Tawakkul. Step 2, ethically orient your relationships by forgiving. Step 3, show receptivity to guidance. Step 4, establish an attentive connection to the source, which is known as Salat. And then practice Shura. You see, Shura naturally emerges from inner alignment. It isn't just a political rule imposed from the top down. But how does this guidance actually reach us in the first place? The text describes itself using these beautiful, luminous metaphors of Ru, an animating data stream, and Nur, illuminating clarity. It's not presented as an external, physical transmission requiring historical deciphering. Rather, it's described as an unmediated internal flash of data straight into human perception. It is, quite literally, framed as an operational software upgrade for the mind.
Putting it all together, the paradigm shift this research outlines is honestly pretty staggering. Under the traditional institutional view, everything is external, it's fragmented, and it's heavily mediated by authority. Think parliaments, exclusive religions, and sectarian schools. But the textual reality reveals a perfectly unified internal framework. We're talking about a lateral network, a universal system of accountability, and a direct internal perceptual upgrade.
And that brings us to one final, really provocative thought to leave you with today. If this ancient text was explicitly designed as a unified internal perceptual lens accessed laterally by conscious agents, how does that completely rewrite our understanding of modern institutional authority? It's a structural analysis that certainly challenges centuries of established narratives. Thank you so much for joining us for this explainer, and as always, keep questioning the structures around you.